Mixing vocals could be the most challenging part of a session. However, knowing some of the technical info behind what's happening definitely makes the process run a lot smoother. So let's discuss the science of mixing perfect vocals as we examine how multiple psychoacoustic principles alter a listener's perception of vocals. At the same time, we'll detail how you could utilize these effects to create impressive, upfront, and professional sounding vocals in your mix. But before we start, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I encourage you to check out our mixing and mastering membership. Just for signing up, you receive 20 mastered songs per year with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering education courses. But more on that at the end of the video. So starting off, let's talk about the chorus effect. Now, if you've ever heard a choir sing, you've definitely encountered this effect. In short, the multiple signals cause constructive interference, making the vocal sound more in tune, complex, and enjoyable overall. The chorus effect relies on a few other psychoacoustic concepts. First is the precedence effect. If two melodic signals are identical, one signal could be delayed up to 40 milliseconds before the listener can hear it as a separate signal.
The roller coaster feeling made its track right through my brain. Tried to replicate it.
The second effect at play is our perception of pitch. We hear separate notes as being 6% apart. In other words, if one performer sings A sharp and another sings 6% lower, then the second performer is singing the note A. If the pitch variation between singers is roughly between 0 to 3%, we perceive them as singing the same note, even if one of the singers is slightly sharp or flat. Now, the more singers that perform, the closer their average is to the intended frequency. Recording vocal doubles is a popular way to achieve this effect.
The roller coaster feeling made its track right through my brain. Tried to replicate it.
But if you don't have any recorded doubles, you could use a doubling plugin to emulate this effect. Again, keep the pitch variation for each emulated double between 0 to 3% of the note's frequency and ensure that the delay isn't greater than 40 milliseconds. If the plugin you're using uses cents as a measurement, know that there are 100 cents between two semitones, so we could alter the cents up to 50 in either direction before it begins to sound out of tune.
The roller coaster feeling made its track right through my brain. Tried to replicate it.
Next up, I want to talk about the masking frequency. Now, I noticed that this one in particular gives people the most trouble. The most prominent masking frequencies occur between 250 and 350 Hz. In other words, the area around 250 Hz covers up or masks many frequencies below and many frequencies above it. If you attenuate this frequency on your vocal, you're going to notice a huge improvement in its clarity. If you center a band around 275 Hz and dip it by a couple of dB, the high mids and the highs will come through much easier. Additionally, if you add the same type of filter to an instrument or instruments that are competing with the vocal, it'll help significantly.
The roller coaster feeling made its track right through my brain. Tried to replicate it. Instead it consumed everything.
Our perception of loudness is closely tied to the concept of a masking frequency. The equal loudness contour gives us a good idea of which frequencies we're most sensitive to. Now, this dip between 2 to 4 kHz indicates that most people hear 2 to 4 kHz as the loudest frequency range. The graph is somewhat counterintuitive, so I'm going to invert it to show which frequencies are easiest for us to hear and which need to be amplified significantly to be perceived at the same loudness as others. I bring this up because 250 to 350 Hz heavily masks 2 to 4 kHz. Because we naturally anticipate 2 to 4 kHz to be the most prominent range, especially when we're hearing vocals or speech, any attenuation to this range is incredibly noticeable and somewhat off-putting. Now, that's why I recommend both attenuating 250 to 350 Hz and amplifying 2 kHz to 4 kHz to create a prominent and clear vocal.
The roller coaster feeling made its track right through my brain. Tried to replicate
Next up, let's talk about advanced sound localization. So 3 main variables help us determine the location of a sound source. They include amplitude, frequency, primarily in the high frequencies, and timing or small variations between the sound's arrival between our left and right ears. Now, most panning only uses amplitude. For example, our pan pots lower the amplitude of one channel to make the sound seem like it's coming from the other direction. So, say I want a BGV to come from the left. By moving the pan pot to the left, I attenuate the right channel, and this makes sense because if a sound's coming from the left ear would hear it as being louder than our right ear would. Following this example, that is the sound source being on the left, our left ear would hear the full frequency spectrum. However, our head would be in the way of the sound source and our right ear. As the sound hits the head, the weakest frequencies, that is the highest frequencies, will be blocked, absorbed, and diffused. As a result, our right ear will hear the same frequency, but with attenuated high frequencies. We could emulate this with an EQ that allows for independent left-right bands. Attenuating the highs with a high shelf filter placed on the right channel mimics the effect that the listener's head has on the high frequencies. Lastly, sound takes some time to travel. It'll have to travel roughly 1 foot as it wraps around the head to get to the opposite ear. If the speed of sound is 1140 feet per second, then the time it takes to reach the opposite ear is about 1.14 milliseconds. With a sample delay plugin, we could enter this value, or a value as close as possible, to 1.14 milliseconds for the right channel. Now this simulates the signal, taking 1.14 milliseconds longer to hit the right ear. A quick nerdy side note, the temperature of air is going to play a big role in the speed of sound due to the density of the air molecules. So if we wanted to get very precise, we could emulate a cold or a hot listening environment by altering the delay time. So let's listen to these 3 effects being introduced to our BGVs to create much more realistic panning.
The roller coaster feeling made its track right through my brain. Tried to replicate it, instead it consumed everything.
Last up, let's cover what I think is the most important concept when mixing vocals, or mixing in general, which is our threshold for hearing. Now, it's no surprise that if something is quiet enough, we can't hear it. But masking makes this idea a lot more interesting. Since sounds cover up other sounds, we have to mix our vocals in the context of everything else to get a good understanding of what can and cannot be heard. Now, one of the first things to get masked and fall below our threshold of hearing is a vocal's quieter details. This is why compression is such a popular effect, especially for vocals. After reducing peaks, we could amplify the vocal without it clipping. When we amplify the compressed vocal, all of the quieter details that were being masked and falling below our threshold for hearing become loud enough to actually hear. Now, if you rely solely on peak-down compressors to accomplish this, their effect on the peaks might be too aggressive. So what we could do is combine peak-down compression with post-compression makeup gain and a subsequent maximizer plugin to bring up these details without any unwanted alterations to the vocal's timbre. So let's listen to the vocal in the context of the mix to first hear how masking is playing a part. Then we'll introduce the compressor with makeup gain. Lastly, we'll enable a maximizer plugin to further amplify these quieter details. Notice that even when the gain changes are compensated for, the vocal sounds fuller and more detailed since these quieter parts no longer fall below our threshold for hearing.
The roller coaster feeling made its track right through my brain. Tried to replicate it, instead it consumed everything.
So, if you introduce these ideas in your next mixing session to make more informed decisions whenever you're doubling, equalizing, panning, or compressing, your vocal production is going to sound a cut above other projects. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I encourage you to check out our mixing and mastering membership. Just for signing up, you receive 20 mastered songs per year with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University mixing and mastering courses, which include start-to-finish walkthrough sessions for various genres and 35 multi-track sessions for hands-on practice. This platform is supported by our thriving community and tight-knit network of audio engineers. And every day, we see and hear great wins in the membership from both new and seasoned engineers, noticing a huge improvement in their mixes and masters after joining. Right now, you could join the membership with a 70% discount, bringing the cost down to just $15 per month. So join today and start creating mixes that sound like professional songs.